A new conflict is brewing in the Middle East, and U.S. forces are in the middle. Turkey appears to be preparing for a ground invasion of northern Syria.
The territory at risk is a region defended by Syrian forces supported by U.S. troops. An invasion could force hundreds of thousands to flee Syria, as well as put further strain on the NATO alliance. Chris Mitchell explains.
For weeks, Turkey has been shelling towns and villages in northeast Syria. Zany and Chinar Bakr live on the border in the strategic Syrian town of Kobane.
Exactly in 19 November, the bombing began. The bombing was very strong. We were very scared.
It was really devastated in northeast Syria with over 28 people killed, 14 of those civilians. They've hit schools, they've hit hospitals, they've hit grain silos, an IDP camp, water facilities, oil facilities. So really all the important infrastructure for civilians has been destroyed. It's unbelievable that it's been so terrible.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan blames Syrian defense forces for a recent bombing in Istanbul and is using it to justify the military campaign.
We've been on top of the terrorists for the past few days with our planes, artillery, and drones. Know that as soon as possible, we will root out all them together with our tanks, soldiers, and our friends who walk and will walk this road with us.
Dave Eubank of the Free Burma Rangers is among those on the front line.
It sounds like that was a pretext for this new onslaught into northeast Syria. So we saw this happening, and then behind that came the threat of a land invasion. As they said, clean out the enemy, clean out the Kurds.
Mayenza says given this geopolitical crisis, the U.S. could play a key role.
Of course, Turkey is important because of the NATO alliance and what's going on in the Ukraine. So this is a really delicate situation for the U.S. government, but nevertheless, they have the tools to push back an invasion, and they should.
The possible invasion puts a growing, vibrant new democracy at risk. It's known as the Autonomous Administration of Northeast Syria.
It's remarkable. They've created this society that respects one another, even with deep ideological differences. And I think that's super important to understand. This isn't a secular society. They're very religious, but they accept one another. They really live among each other with this remarkable religious freedom culture.
The Syrian Defense Forces is backed by the U.S. and serves as the young democracy's military arm. 900 U.S. soldiers work alongside the SDF.
But our presence keeps Turks from completely invading, Iranians from attacking. It holds Assad back a little bit and helps keep ISIS tamped down. So the U.S. has a very important role diplomatically with the surrounding countries, especially Turkey, to find compromises between the SDF and the Turks, which I think is possible.
Mayenza sees the devastating consequences coming from any Turkish invasion.
We know if Turkey invades Kobane, they are going to decimate the people, torture, kill, rape, and commit atrocities, especially targeting the vibrant group of religious converts there.
Meanwhile, as Christmas approaches, Zany and Chinar in Kobane are holding on to hope and their faith.
We just save ourselves in God's hands. So we, like another people here, hug their children and cry and pray. God, we just need the peace here.
Zany and Chinar are not the only ones in harm's way. Hundreds of thousands of Christians, Kurds, Arabs, Yazidis, and other groups in northeast Syria would have to flee if Turkey invades. Gordon?
Well, Chris, what's the risk here? It looks like the U.S. and Turkey could actually get into a fighting war. What would that mean for NATO? What would that mean for the region?
Well, that would put a lot of strains on the NATO alliance, Gordon, for sure, being two members of that NATO alliance. It's unlikely, actually, I think that they would actually fight each other. What's more likely is an incident between the U.S. and Turkey. For example, during this recent bombing campaign, Turkish planes, they hit just literally 300 feet away from a base that the U.S. forces share with the Syrian Defense Forces. So if Turkey ever hits those U.S. forces, that would create an international incident between these two NATO allies. And as Dave Eubank said in our report, the U.S. presence really there in northeast Syria is key. Right now, it's holding back not only a possible Turkish invasion, but also the Iranians and other bad actors in the region. But it certainly does create a crisis and a lot of tension between these two NATO allies.
Well, it's amazing to me that ISIS is still a threat in the region. What impact could a Turkish invasion have on the fight against ISIS?
It could have a huge impact, Gordon, because believe it or not, some people may think the fight against ISIS is over, but it's not. In northeast Syria, the SDF is guarding probably the largest prison of ISIS members and their families, more than 50,000, 53,000 members of ISIS. In fact, in the recent bombing campaigns, some of those ISIS members tried to escape because those Turkish bombs hit very close to there, and it brought some tension within the camp itself. So if these thousands of ISIS members and their families were freed, and some say that is kind of the purpose of Erdogan, that would be a catastrophe for the world. So the FDS, the Syrian Democratic Forces, are saying, now if Turkey invades, they can't both fight the Turks and then keep guard over this prison. So it's a major problem, as Nadine Maenza told us in our interview there. If the government of northeast Syria falls, it would be a recipe for disaster for the world.
Well, what's Erdogan's strategic interest? Why would Turkey want to do that? Why would they want to invade? Why would they want to free ISIS again?
Well, first of all, their pretext is that they have a fight against the PKK, and that is the separatist Kurdish group in the east of Turkey. Now, they're saying, Erdogan is saying that the SDF, and I don't want to get too much alphabet soup here, but the SDF is allied with the PKK. The SDF is just the military arm of this new government. So his goal is actually to come in and wipe out the Kurds. That's his enemy for many times. And so he wants, as he says, he wants this buffer region to protect Turkey from terror attacks like the one in Istanbul. He also doesn't like the fact that there's freedom on his border. This northeast Syrian enclave is really a breath of fresh air in the whole region, Gordon, and this is something that he wants to eradicate.
Well, you've been to Kobane. Tell us why that new democracy there that is so unique in the Middle East, particularly for Christians, in an odd way, it reminds me of what Lebanon was back in the 1960s.
Exactly. It's an amazing story, Gordon. When we were there, it really was a revelation to us. This new government has representatives from all the groups in the region. That includes Kurds and Arabs, Yazidis, and Christians. I remember talking to one Christian woman who served in the government there, and she said this would never happen if she served under the Assad regime. And even more striking, Gordon, and this is something that really is so rare in the Middle East, is the fact that Muslims who have converted, become followers of Jesus, they become Christians, they're tolerated under this new government, just like Zany and Chinar in our feature there in our report. So this is huge. It's something unique in all of the Middle East. And Nadine Maenza in our story, she says this is one reason why the Turkish President Erdogan wants to invade northeast Syria. So Zany Chinar, as well as Dave Eubank and Nadine Maenza, they're calling for prayer. But they also recommend picking up the phone and calling representatives and senators on Capitol Hill, and those phone calls and certainly those prayers can make a difference.
All right, Chris, we'll be praying, and thanks for that report. Let me give you a picture of something else that may be on Erdogan's mind. He's absolutely said he wants to restore the Ottoman Empire, and we've got a map of the former borders of the Ottoman Empire at their peak back in 1683. Now, the modern-day Turkey is just that small piece, but when you look at the larger, what used to be called the Caliphate, that's the amount of territory that they controlled. They lost all of that in the end of World War I, so that's just 104 years ago. So when Erdogan is making plans to invade Syria, he's trying to reestablish Turkish domination, Ottoman domination, over regions that they controlled for centuries. For them, they have a God-given right, if you will, to do this. And his vision and his dream for the Turkish people is a lot bigger than just northeastern Syria. He's already announced he wants to do this. Is the world prepared for, is this just talk, or is he actually going to put military muscle behind it? In the vacuum currently being created, where Russia is weakened because of the war in Ukraine, Russia can't respond. Will the U.S. respond and try to defend Syria? I think that's a no. And where does he go? And would he be emboldened to actually take more territory? Another thing to keep in mind is that these borders, whether you're talking Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan. All of these borders were mapped out literally by Winston Churchill, famously on a napkin. Syria and Lebanon were given over to French protection after World War I, and Britain got Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Jordan, and what was called the British Mandate over Palestine to create a Jewish state. So all of these things in Middle Eastern history are brand new, and they haven't really adjusted to it or even believed in it. And Turkey still believes that in the Ottoman Empire and that they are rightfully the caliphate over all the region.